Hey everybody, this is Andrew here with the Tower Electric Bike Repair Shop, and today we're going to be talking about flats and flat prevention. Flats are obviously one of the biggest causes of pain in the cycling world, and people have been, since the beginning of cycling, trying to find every solution to the flats that they could think of. And we'll let you know, there really is no true solution to flats. At the end of the day, flats are going to occur, and you can do lots of steps to mitigate those, but at the end of the day, those flats are still going to occur. But today we're going to talk about lots of steps that you can take to help mitigate the amount of flats that you get on your electric bike. Now, electric bikes in general tend to get a lot more flats than a regular bicycle. This is due to the heavy weight that they have and the faster speeds that they travel. And if you add on to that, most of the electric bikes on the market tend to have rear hub driven motors. That situates almost all of the weight on the bike, including the rider weight, all on the rear here. So this rear is getting pushed down onto the street way heavier than the front tire. So you tend to get flats on the rear a lot more frequently than the front on e-bikes. Now, one of the most simple things that I always recommend to people to help mitigate flats is something as small as your tire pressure. A lot of people like to run their tire pressure a little bit lower because they feel it gives them a good, comfy, cushy ride. However, the lower your tire pressure, the more susceptible to flats your tires will be. You kind of have to do a trade-off. You can either have it be nice and cushy and plush while you ride, but you're gonna have to be okay with the more flats you get. Like on our beach bum here, for example, these run the Schwalbe Fat Frank tires. These Fat Frank tires, the lower end of the tire pressure is about 30 to 45 PSI, but I almost always recommend getting that PSI level up to about 50 PSI. I mean, personally, I ride the bike on 65 PSI, but that's because I'm a very large guy and I have a lot of weight on me, so I want to be sure that those tires are as pressured up as they can be. Someone a little bit smaller, I would still recommend at least 45 to 50 though. If you push below that 45, it's going to give you a plush, comfy ride, but you're going to get flats like crazy. One of the other styles of bikes that's a little more difficult on are these fat tire bikes. Fat tire bikes are very popular all over the e-bike market. Now, one of the things that's a little unfortunate about the fat tires is the bigger the tire, the lower the tire pressure inside. The tire itself feels really hard. Realistically, there's only about 20 to 30 PSI of pressure inside that tire, which may seem like a lot to you, but realistically in the grand scheme of bicycles is really not that much. Like the Fat Frank here, for example, has a max PSI of 65. Skinny 700 road tires, typically around 80 to 120 PSI. So really, this 20 to 30 PSI is very low. Now, unfortunately, there's not a lot you can do with that tire pressure. Pretty much for fat tire bikes, I always recommend inflate it exactly up to what it prints on the side. You can obviously go lower, but the fat tires, you really increase the risk of punctures. But on top of that, you also increase the risk of what's called a pinch flat. Now, pinch flat only occurs when your tire pressure is too low. What happens on a pinch flat is, if you're riding and you hit a bump, if your tire pressure is nice and high, your tire's just gonna, go up and over that bump. But what can happen if your tire pressure is extra low is instead of going over that bump, the tire flattens. And then what happens is the metal rim itself will then come down and pinch in between the ground and the wheel, the tube. Now, the bike and the wheel are very heavy. They're gonna tear through that tube like toilet paper. So the second you hit that bump at too low a tire pressure, you're gonna get two lines in your tube and your tire's gonna go flat. So that is another reason why you always wanna make sure your tire pressure is high. Tire pressure does get lost a little bit over time. So before you ride, always check your tire pressure, make sure it's topped off. Now, aside from the tire pressure, there are also some other, accessories that you can get for your bike that help mitigate flats. One of the biggest ones on the market are tire liners. Now, what's a tire liner? A tire liner is, a thin piece of material that goes inside of the tire, in between the tube and the outside of the tire. And basically what it creates is it creates an extra layer that a puncture would have to go through before it got to that tube. Now, there are a lot of styles of tire liners. There's really thin ones, like Tuffy liners that are on the market that are inexpensive. Then there's also super heavy duty Tannis liners that are big foam inserts that inside the tire and give you a couple inches of thickness. Both of them, they're a bit of work to install. The Tannis liner, I would say, is much more protective than the Tuffy liners. However, the Tannis liner is potentially gonna give you a little bit of a rougher feel. Different people have had different experiences. We've installed a lot of Tannis liners here, And most of the time, people usually have the same complaint about them. You know, they don't get many more flats, but the ride becomes very hard and harsh. And that's because you basically filled it with a bunch of hard material inside that tire, so you don't get as much cushion as just basic air. Tuffy liners are also a decent option as well. However, with the Tuffy liners, you really have to stay on top of your tire pressure, because how the Tuffy liners stay in position is, the Tuffy liners are basically a thin tape-like material. It's not sticky, and it uses the pressure of the tube pressing it against the tire to hold it in place. And it generally works pretty well. But if you're not staying on top of your tire pressure, what can happen is if you let your tire pressure get low, that tube isn't pressing the liner against the tire as firm as it should be. And what can happen is that tire liner can shimmy out of place. And once it starts shimming out of place, it can wrap around your tube, and then it can actually cause flats. So the thing you bought to prevent flats can actually start to cause you flats if you're not being careful with them. Another thing that you can add to your tires and tubes to help prevent flats is you can actually add a sealant inside of the tube. Probably one of the most popular ones you'll see on the market is a brand called Slime. Slime themselves actually make specific tubes that come pre-filled with their sealant. But you can also just buy tubes of slime and you can inject it into your own tubes at home. Slime necessarily isn't the only sealant on the market. It's just probably the most popular, most prevalent. However, with the avenue of tubeless setups, especially on mountain bikes, you can also use those sealants in your tire as well. Like I myself, I'm a huge fan of Orange Seal. I think it works very well. And on top of that, it's a lot easier to deal with once it leaks out. But some other good ones on the market as well are Stan's No Tube, and Slime even has their own tubeless sealant. But for going in your tubes, I'd recommend the regular old Slime for it. Now, you know, you can do all of those things as well, but at the end of the day, flats can still occur. I've had many people that were like, I don't want to deal with a flat ever again, and spent as much as they possibly could getting the top of the line products to prevent flats. They almost always come back at some point because a flat at the end of the day is still going to occur. That's why having like a tire liner or a sealant or making sure your tire pressure is up is a lot of times just enough what you need to prevent a small flat from occurring. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a wonderful day.